everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, New 1099 Requirements and Adherence with Dynamics GP. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us today. There are a couple of housekeeping items we'd like to mention before we begin. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please either raise your hand so we can unmute you, or you can submit them through the GoToWebinar questions. We'll be answering questions throughout the presentation and also following up after the presentation to answer any additional questions. I'd like to introduce today's speaker. We have Philip Nichols, a principal GP consultant here at Requirements. So at this point, Philip, I believe we're ready to transition over to you.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. I appreciate that. Good morning or afternoon, everyone. My name is Philip Nichols, and I'm going to be showing you some 1099 information here for your GP-based system. So let's go ahead. I'm sure everyone can see my screen now. I'm going to click through a couple of these. Here's some, of course, some audio information if you need that still, and some information on some upcoming webinars and events that Lindsay will be talking about later. So I really want to kind of walk you through the 1099 process within GP itself, because some of you may be more newer at the system than others. And then we're going to carry on from there with some IRS information, state information, and other things that are associated with the 1099s. So you see, we're going to kind of go through the basic setup and some payment processing. I want to go through that with you. I want to look into inquiries and doing corrections to your 1099s, and we're going to look at some printing of 1099s. So let's go ahead and jump in and get started looking at our basics here. All right, and you should all be able to see my Great Plains screen now. Now, some of the windows, if they look a little different from yours, I am using Dynamics GP 2016, but the processing will work the same way. So the first thing I want to start out with is my setup. I'm on my purchasing homepage. My setup menus, I'm going to go into my Payables Setup. Now, from your Payables Setup, you do have a 1099 Setup button. So let's open that. And this will give you access to the window where you can set the limits for each type of 1099 you provide. You have a drop down here, so you have your dividend 1099s, your interest 1099s, and the most normal type, or the type most of us use, the miscellaneous 1099s. This will list each type by its box number, and it will show you the amounts, the minimum amounts for the 1099s. Now, what this does is prevents your system from printing any 1099 for a vendor when their total is less than this minimum amount. So a lot of these, such as your non-employee compensation, the minimum amount is $600. So if you pay someone $500, they're not going to get a 1099 that year. If they make 601, they will get that 1099. Now, if you need to, these can be changed manually, simply by clicking in the field and putting in the new amount. But also when updates are made to these amounts, Microsoft normally will send out an update to the system itself, and this will all be updated automatically. Let's jump out of this window real quick. Okay, through here. Now, the other main setting that you need to have, aside from your minimum amounts, are on the vendor cards themselves. So you go to your cards menu, pull up a vendor. I'm going to pull up one of my existing vendors here. Let's see here, Blumenthal. Go for Beaumont Construction. There we go. All right, and of course, this is just the general vendor card with their name, address, their check name on there, and of course, all of their other contact information. From the vendor card, you're going to go to your options screen, and this is where you will put in your 1099 settings. Now, the fields that you have to have on here are your tax ID, and this comes from, of course, the information the vendor gives you. You'll put that they are a 1099 vendor, and of course, your choices are not a 1099 vendor, your dividend, interest, and of course, miscellaneous. And once you choose your vendor, your type for the tax, then you'll choose the box that's associated with that particular tax. So you want to make sure you have this field and this field selected and this field selected. So we'll hit OK. Okay, so those are your basic setups behind the 1099 process itself. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. All right, transactions, of course, happen when you're entering your AP transactions. We're going to our transactions menu here. I'm just going to open up a screen real quick and pretend like I'm going to enter a transaction for one of my vendors. Get a little description, tab through. I'm going to use Beaumont because I happen to know they're a 1099 vendor. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put in their purchasing amount. I'll say that I'm paying them $150. Now, when I tab out, because they are a 1099 vendor, you have access to the 1099 amount field, and the system automatically populates that with the entire amount. Now, let's say for some reason your vendor had given you an invoice for services and let's say inventory, and you weren't going to be counting the inventory towards their 1099 amount, only the service amount. You can, of course, manually change this amount right here. Like let's say their services were a total of $100 and the inventory would be $50. Then all I have to do is overwrite that amount and only the $100 will be reported at the end of the year, or added to the total, I should say, for this particular vendor at the end of the year. Now, something else you can do, let me pull up my vendor card real quick. Let's go into our options. Now, this particular vendor is set up to be a miscellaneous, and everything is going to non-employee compensation. Now, let's say for some reason this particular payment was actually not going to be non-employee compensation. It was for some other type of 1099 payment that I owed the vendor. From your 1099 amount field, you can click on the jump arrow right here, which takes you to the Payables 1099 entry window. This allows you to change either the tax type or the box number for this particular payment only. This does not do anything to the basic settings of the vendor, and the next time you pay the vendor, everything will go back to the base settings for them. In this instance, I'm going to just choose this as a substitute payment. Then I can click OK, and now I can just continue processing as before. I'll pay this gentleman $150. $100 of that is a 1099 amount that will be reported to box 8 when his 1099 is printed at the end of the year. I'll put this in a batch real quick. We'll just save that in case we need to come back to it later. Okay, so that's your basic processing things you'll do, of course, during the year to record the 1099 amounts for your vendors. Sorry about that. Let's flip back over to our slideshow just a minute here. Okay, so we looked at our limits. We've gone into our customer cards. We did look at doing your transactions and how you can modify things at your transaction levels. So let's go to our inquiries and corrections and start looking through those because there are quite a few things I want to cover there. First thing we're going to start with, of course, is our vendor summary. Yep, sorry about that. Chose the wrong one. There we go. All right, so we're back in Great Plains. And from our cards, you have a summary selection. And this window, of course, gives you quite a bit of information about a particular vendor. So I'm going to go ahead and pull my Beaumont vendor in. This, of course, shows me quite a bit of information, current information, such as their agings, their last check dates, their last invoices, last check amounts, various things. From here, though, you can also get to the 1099 amounts for this vendor. Now, you can look at things, of course, either based on a period or based on a year. I'm going to go ahead and look at my period window right now. Okay. So this window will open. It's automatically in the period that your system date is set at. And as you see, I have amounts here. I've paid him this total amount. Underneath that, it shows the total of the 1099 amounts that I've paid this particular vendor. And you can actually, of course, scroll through the months looking for other various payments that may exist during this particular year. And of course, if you want to look at a different year, all you have to do, change your year, and the system will switch over, and then you can start looking for anything you may have paid them at different points of that particular year. Now you'll notice, let me switch back over to 2017. Let's go back to the period where the gentleman has some. Right. On this screen, there is a 1099 amount field, of course, with a jump button, which we're going to look at. I'm going to move this to the side for just a moment, and we'll look at that in a moment. I want to go back over here. I want to pull up the vendor's yearly summary. And again, same thing. The yearly summary is going to show your 1099 amounts. Now you can look at this window, of course, several ways. You can look at it based on your calendar or fiscal year, or you can look at it on any amount that has accumulated since you last ran the closing process in your payables module at year end. So if I flip this over to calendar, of course, it's going to ask what year I'm looking at. Everything disappears. I just have to hit calculate, and my amounts are repopulated. And you'll see here, there's also a jump button attached to the 1099 amount field. I'll pull this one over here. Now, both of those jump buttons actually give you access directly into this window right here, your 1099 detail card. Let's open that up. I'm going to go ahead and pull in my, oops, sorry about that. Pull in my vendor again. Now this opens up, it's automatically on their tax type. It's automatically chooses to display itself by the month, and of course, the month is based on the date my system is in at the time I open this window. And as you see here, I have non-employee compensation, the $2,445 and odd change, just like it showed on the other windows that we had open. Oh, well, sorry about that. Come on. Let's get you to move over here a little bit. I'm going to pull up some of the other windows I had open. I'm going to go back in this gentleman's summary. And so this is where I was saying you can actually hit these jump buttons and they will actually take you to this window if you don't already have it open. Same thing from the yearly summaries, it'll jump you right into that window, but you'll be looking, of course, at the yearly amounts. So let's flip this over right now. So now we're on year, and again, the year is 2017, and it's showing you that that's the total I've paid him for the entire year so far. And you can, of course, as with the other windows, you can change the dating in this field, and the window will automatically update itself to reflect whatever year you want to see in your system. Now from this window, and this is going to kind of get into the next thing we're going to talk about, and I want to pop back up my presentation real quick so you can see it. So we went through the vendor summary, and we're on our 1099 details. Now, of course, it's possible you may have made an error somewhere along the way during the year, and you need to make some changes to your vendors, to their 1099 amounts. And so there's quite a few ways these changes can be accomplished, and we're going to start with one of the easiest ones, which is the 1099 details window we're just looking at right now in GP. Okay, when you're in this window, you can actually change the amounts for this 1099 vendor, but you can only change them on a monthly basis. When you're in the year, you're not allowed to click on any of the fields. But if you switch it back over to month, then you do have access to the fields. So you could, within this window, change the amounts, move the amounts between various boxes if you wanted to, or you could lower the amount in just this one particular box. Now, any change you make here will be reflected when you print the 1099s for this vendor. However, the changes you make here are not reflected anywhere else. They will not go into the transaction history and make changes to those amounts there. So what you will need to do for something like that, to make your transactional changes, there are 3 different ways you can really do these kind of things. First, I want to show you, we have a utility with an update 1099 information. In our transaction menu, at the very bottom, we have an edit 1099 transaction information button. And within Pistol Tools, there is also a 1099 modifier. Now, all of these, in a way, do very similar functions, but they're also very different from each other. So let's get in there and look at a few of those differences. Go ahead and close down some of these windows. Get back to my purchasing homepage. Okay. So the first one, let's look at updating our 1099 information. So this window allows you to update quite a few things. You can update just things at the vendor level, you can update transactional information, or you can update vendor and 1099 transaction information. Now, in order for you to do anything to a vendor in this window, the vendor must already be set up as a 1099 vendor. Now, if you've forgotten to set your vendors up, of course, you can always come in here, go to your options screen, and do these settings first. Now, once you've actually got that vendor set up, then you're ready to move forward with making changes. Like, let's say in the middle of the year, you realize that someone should have been a 1099 vendor and you've paid them 4 or 5 times without them being set up as a 1099 vendor. Then you come in their card, make the changes as needed, and I need to give this one a tax ID. There we are. I'll save that. And of course, we're going to be miscellaneous, non-employee compensation. Now I can actually take that vendor and I can create 1099 amounts for them that are stored in the actual history of that vendor. So I'm going back to this one. Okay, so what I can do now, if I want to, I could just move his transactions, or I could make changes to the vendor and the transactions at the same time. If I'm only going to update the vendor, then of course this window works based on your selection here. You're going to be able to do different types of transfers. Like right now, I could take this vendor, I could move him from any tax type or all of the tax types if I had set, because you remember when you're doing your transaction entry, you can change tax type and the box you're reporting to. So if you had a vendor set up where you had multiple transactions going to different tax types and different box numbers, you can choose all of those tax types and all of those box numbers and move them to only one tax type and one box number. Or you can move them, you can kind of break it up. Say you've done a few things as an interest. You're going to choose your box, this one only, then you could move that individual item over. If you choose transactions, you're only going to have voucher numbers or document dates that you're able to move over. And this is actually system-wide. So this is going to show you information. Let me get out of my beginning balances here. For every vendor that's available in your system. So moving just like a 1099 amount would pick up every vendor and move all of their amounts for any document you included in your range over to a 1099 field. You can also do vendor and 1099 transactions. And this to me is the better one because this allows you to narrow, of course, your range down to just an individual vendor, such as my Ace Travel. And I can insert it. Now if I process this, this will look at my Ace Travel vendor and it will move all of their previous invoices that were not 1099, I'm sorry. It will move them over to the 1099 amount field so that I'm able to generate 1099 for this vendor, assuming that I've paid him more than $600 in 1 year. Now let's look at another one. I want to pull up now. I want to go to the Pistol tool and look at that real quick. Okay. Now this Pistol tool allows you to, of course, do your 1099 modifications. The way this particular tool works, though, is it's based on a year of your choosing. Whereas the Update 1099 window can cover all years for a particular vendor. This method only covers the year you've selected. And what it also does is it takes every transaction for that year, for that vendor, and it will turn it into a 1099 amount. And I have an instance that I'll show you. I'm going to pull up 2017, and all I'm going to do is print the report. You'll get this warning. Pop it on up. Let's look at it on the screen. Okay. So what this is showing is that for these two vendors, before they became 1099 vendors, I had entered transactions for them, one for a $50 payment and for the other one a $6,828.57 payment. So what the system will do is it will just take these vouchers, it will take that amount and it'll apply it into the 1099 field. So when you run this, it's going to get any vendor that is 1099 and any voucher that doesn't have a 1099 amount on it will be modified, moved over to the 1099 amount fields, and you'll be able to, of course, then go into the history of that voucher and see that there was a 1099 amount placed against that voucher. Now, while this is a great thing and it makes it very easy, this type of like blunt force tool, make sure you have a backup of your database prior to running this tool, just in case something unexpected happens. Now, if you're doing this, of course, at the end of the year and you've already begun entering new year transactions for a particular vendor, those new year transactions are ignored by the system because it's only looking at the things that were posted into the year you're running this for. In my case, 2017. It ignores everything in 2018 that I may have already put in for these vendors. So if you're going to do it this way, if you kind of like change your vendor in the middle of the year, then you run this tool to move all of their information over, but you'd already posted some 2018 items before turning them into a 1099 vendor, you'll have to also run this tool against them for 2018. So let's get out of these windows real quick. And let's go back to our third method of modifying the 1099s. That's editing the 1099 transaction information. And I personally prefer this window. What this window will let you do is, we'll pull up my ACE Travel. It shows you if a vendor is already a 1099 vendor and they've had 1099 transactions created, you're able to view them from here. If it's someone that you've just turned into a 1099 vendor, they do not have any 1099 amounts yet, but they do have other transactions. So if I click this, now if they had transactions, they would show here. Same thing, all credit transactions. If I had any for those, they're going to show. So I'm going to click here, hit my button, and this pulls in all of the transactions, regardless of whether they were 1099 or not. So I'm going to click back on this one, redisplay it again. You see I have nothing there again. And this is because it was the middle of this year before I actually turned this vendor into a 1099 vendor. But from this window, I can go into everything I've ever paid this particular vendor, and I can modify those individual invoices. Now, of course, because of how I turned him, none of his document amounts are showing. So I could do something like click in this field, come over here to look at that voucher, and I can see that it was a $50 voucher. So I can, of course, make some other changes about that. Let's go there. There we go. All right. Now I could just change this one, but as you see, he's got another thing within 2017. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that one over also. Now the other ones, of course, 2014, 2013, let's say he wasn't a 1099 vendor before 2017. So I'm going to leave those alone, and I can only make changes to these as I want to. Again, I can come in here. Oh, look, I've got a $0 payment. That one is great. We're going to ignore that one. So I'll turn that one back into not a. There we are. Okay, so if this is the only change I need to make, then I can hit process, and the system will go into this particular voucher. Let's pull it back up and look at it. And it will populate this 1099 amount field. But there again, let's say that I only want part of this to go to the 1099, as opposed to the entire $50 for the invoice. I could choose to only do $25 as a 1099. And of course, as you saw when we were entering transactions, I may want this to go to a different box than the one normally associated with the vendor, or a different type of tax other than miscellaneous. So any of those changes I make, I just have to hit my process. System will do its thing, and it will show me that it made changes. So my old 1099 amount was 0, new amount is 25, and it's in box 7, miscellaneous compensation. Let me pull that window back up again real quick. So now if you notice, that transaction has moved over into the debit transaction listing. So now I can again drill down on this window, and now you see it's changed. So this particular one allows you to go back into the history, make the changes for any amount you want to. If you run the pistol tool, it'll make the changes to history, does it on the entire invoice. So, and you can actually, of course, combine these windows together. If you use the pistol tool, just do everything over for a particular vendor, and then you could come into your edit 1099 transaction information, and you could pick that vendor and maybe change some of the individual invoices to be either different amounts or to go to different boxes. So you're able to combine all the methods together to get your 1099s correct and where they need to be. And of course, I prefer using, in this instance, the transaction information window, updating the information, or the 1099 or the pistol tool, because while it's great that you can come into the summaries and just make the changes you need to print that 1099 out, again, it doesn't actually change any of the document information that's stored in the vendor. So I prefer to use one of these to make sure that all the historic records are correct, and I'm not just putting amounts into the summary window itself. All right, our final thing on this one is, of course, the actual printing of the 1099s themselves. And that, again, is a fairly simple process. As part of your routines, you have a print 1099 process. You click on that, it opens up your window. It's going to go ahead and populate it itself with all the information that's stored in your company system as far as the name, the address. If you have your federal ID number stored, that will automatically populate also. I'll put one in there. I can print these, of course, for any year that's within my system, so I can go back and print for historic years if I need to. You choose the type you're printing for. You'll choose your form type, which of course is either continuous or the single feed. You can either narrow it down to a range of vendors, or you can run it for all vendors. Or if you wanted to break it up by classes or by types of vendors, you could also do that. If you're running your 1099s, and let's say you have a vendor who is a miscellaneous type vendor, but you've put different amounts into different boxes throughout the year, this will print. All you have to do is just print it for just the miscellaneous, and it'll put all of the amounts in the correct boxes on that vendor's 1099. Now, also from here, of course, if you're printing on continuous, it allows you to do alignment forms prior to actually starting your print jobs. And this is also the window you'll come to print your 1096. And all you have to do is, of course, just switch that over to your 1096 and choose print. Okay, so those are the basics, of course, of getting your 1099s out of your system in GP. I'm going to go ahead and print. See what these are looking like. See what we've got for 2017. And there's my Beaumont Construction for the 244588. And because they're the only persons, or the only vendor, I should say, that I paid enough to generate the 1099 for 2017, this will be the only one I will get when I print my actual forms. And of course, you can, if you want to, print an edit list prior to actually printing your forms. And again, it will give you a listing of everyone that's going to print a 1099 form. And this, of course, is a good thing to review prior to actually printing your forms out for real. It'll allow you to make sure all of your numbers are lined up, all of your vendors are there, and if you need to go back and check anyone and make any of the types of adjusting entries that we've looked at today. Okay, so let's get back over to our slide presentation here. Okay, so we've looked at, of course, some of the ways of setting up your 1099s, doing inquiries, doing corrections, and of course, printing them. Let's move forward. Okay, now there have been changes, of course, as we know, to the dates when all of your information is due now. So the first thing we're going to look at, of course, I can't show you every state, but there are state deadline changes. And I believe it's around 21 states or so far. The District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, they're all setting new deadlines for the W-2s and the 1099s for the state income tax reporting. So I do recommend, of course, we can help you with this, but you really should check on your state's Department of Revenue website to determine when you need to have your state forms in. Now, there have been lots of changes, of course, to our IRS deadlines, of course, due to the PATH Act. And so there are certain things that employers, small businesses have to file by the 31st. If you see here, your forms 1099 miscellaneous with box 7 populated. Those are due to the recipient and the IRS by January 31st. And that's whether you're filing them electronically or using your paper forms. Forms 1099 miscellaneous that are non-box 7, you have to have those to a recipient, again, by the 31st, but the IRS is not until the 28th, unless that Form 1099 miscellaneous has a box 8 or 14 populated. That instance, you don't have to have those to the recipient until the 15th, and again to the IRS by the 28th. So this is definitely something to look into. And if you do other types of 1099 forms, things that are not 1099 miscellaneous, they have also made multiple changes to the dates. All of that information is due back to the government. Now, something else, of course, the government requires is electronic filing. If you have more than 250 individual 1099s in any calendar year, they want you to file them electronically. Now, GP does not natively print the electronic filing. What we normally recommend to our customers and what they can look to is a company called Greenshades. Greenshades is a third-party ISV add-on that works with Dynamics GP, Dynamics AX, Dynamics SL, and actually some other types of accounting packages. What this does is it installs into your system, it hooks into your payables and your payroll files, and it allows you to do a lot of your filing for the IRS and for your state-based filings. This will allow you to easily create the electronic data that you need to upload to the Social Security or the IRS websites for your year-end processing. Of course, you're doing W-2s or your 1099s. And it's a fairly easy system. It's basically a wizard. You just walk through the various steps of the type of filing you're going to do, and it will create it for you. And as you see from here, they can do quite a few types of files. Besides 1099s, they can do your 1095s, your SUDAs, your W-2s, 940s, 941s, new hires, 401s, local acts, EEO. They can generate all of these for you in the electronic format you need to upload this to the government. The only thing that you'll have to worry about, of course, is getting all those accounts set up with the various government agencies to submit your forms electronically. Now, they also offer a service. If you have, say, over 250, let's say you have 1,000 or even 2,000 1099s that you're having to send out for a given year, they offer a service where you can send your file to them and they will actually either do the printing and mailing for you, or they offer like an online electronic distribution. So your vendor would get a website to go to and then they could go and print their own copy of their 1099 onto a blank paper. Or you can kind of mix it up if you want to have some reported electronically or some reported on actual physical paper. They can split that up for you. And this is really, it helps because it takes some of the headache off of you for having to do all of the processing. Now, of course, I know that some, like Office Depot, things like that, they actually sell software that allows you to process your own 1099s yourself and will help you in creating the electronic upload you need. And those work too. We can, of course, if you want to go a route like that, if you need like assistance in getting the actual data out of GP that you need to populate your product with in order to generate those 1099s, we can also assist you with things like smart lists or views out of SQL that may help you get the information out, which you're then able to take and put into that system that you've bought from, say, Home Depot or somewhere like that. And that is a quick overview of 1099s. Are there questions?
Yes, we do have
All right.
a couple questions. Okay. The first one, what GP tables are vendor 1099 and transaction 1099 info stored in?
Actually, I don't know those off the top of my head. If you can take that, though, I will email that to you as soon as we finish up here. I just have to run into GP and look it up real quick.
Yep, I have a list.
I'm sorry. Apologize for that. Okay, excellent.
Perfect. The next question, do you need to be logged in as a system administrator to use the Pistol tool?
That is kind of, I'll say normally. The thing about that is when you go into Pistol, you can open up, if you have access to the menu, you can open up the window, and it's not until you actually click on what you're wanting to change and hit next that it will suddenly pop up a window that says you need to be logged in as SA to do this function. And it does that to things where you may be actually making table changes. So in this instance, for the 1099 modifier, I would say that you probably do need to have the SA login to run this functionality.
Alrighty. The next question, can you pick which year in the utilities section?
Can you be a little more?
That's
in the update 10, like when you're updating your 1099 information in that window?
When updating 1099, yes.
Okay, no, in this particular window here, based on what you've chosen here, it gives you certain things. So you can narrow it down. If you're doing the vendor and the 1099, you could narrow it down to like a range of document dates, but it doesn't like just pick the base year. So I'd really have to do like say 1/1/17 to 12/31/17 to move everything. And of course I could insert that. Let's see here. I want to kind of like this. Oops. Then of course I would choose the vendor I wanted to do this with. Say it's travel company. I'll insert that. Oh, I didn't hit insert. I'm sorry about that. Let me go back and do that again. There we go. So in this instance, it's going to take every document within this date range for my Ace Travel Company, and it will update those particular documents. So I could do it like that if I wanted to only do, like say, a partial year or just an entire year, but I didn't necessarily want to go back in history and make changes.
Okay, awesome. So our next question. Just to confirm, we use continuous if we want to print all vendor 1099s and only use single feed for selected ones?
Actually, that depends on the type of form you have. The continuous form is actually a continuous form. You know, like you can buy the forms that will fit into a tractor feed printer, and they're continuously running. The other ones are actually the laser based. And regardless of which one you choose, it's going to print. Let's go into our print real quick. If I choose single feed, but I don't choose anything like to narrow down my range of vendors, this will print for every vendor that has a 1099 in my system for this particular year. Same thing, if I chose continuous, that would be the ones on the tractor feed, and they would just run through your tractor printing. Now, of course, you know, there are multiple copies to your 1099s, so you'll print them. You could print them multiple times based on, of course, the type of form you have.
Okay. Let's see, our next one. My printed 1099s never match up to my forms. They're way off, wrong boxes, not just minor alignment issues. How do I correct it to match my form?
Yes, I would, actually what I would do is, what you kind of need to do is print just one 1099 for one vendor. Just go ahead and print it out to your printer. Like I'm going to choose one here. I think it's Beaumont was my vendor, so I can just go in here. I can choose Beaumont. And of course, Beaumont again. So I'm going to print this. I'm going to print it up to the screen. All right, and just like you can with any report in GP, this output form can be modified by going into Report Writer, and you can do it, of course, from here. So I can go ahead and hit print. I can modify, and it opens that layout in Report Writer, and you're able to move the fields around as you need them to. And then, of course, once you do this, you know you need to go in and give yourself security to this modified 1099 miscellaneous form, so that when you print your 1099s for real, you'll get the correct layout.
Alrighty. When a W-9 comes back with the parent company for tax filing purposes, but the check remit to name is the DBA, what field do we populate for the 1099 name?
The check name.
All right.
When you're setting, that is when you're on your vendor cards. There we go. Okay, so this check name field is what populates on the 1099 itself. And of course, normally when you put in a vendor, it's automatically populated with whatever you put into the name field. But this could be a DBA, something else that I'm paying to, and that's what needs to show on the 1099.
Okay.
So like if you had multiple people, say, working in one office, you could be paying the people individually for their work, but then have the office itself as the check name, and then they would file that under their office information for the total 1099 amounts paid to them, as opposed to having like each person within that office file their own 1099.
Awesome. Are these instructions?
And I'm using the word office loosely. Sorry about that. I just wanted to jump in. Okay, go ahead now.
Are these instructions the same for GP 2013?
Yes, they are.
Awesome. And then we just migrated to GP this month. Can I update the vendor 1099 information for the first 9 months of the year?
Absolutely, you can. And you can, well, now let me think for just a moment. Now, if you don't, if you like were did you upgrade or were you integrated into GP? Are you coming from another system? Because then it would depend on if any history was brought in as far as your invoicing for the year. So if you probably just came in, say at the 1st of September, and there's no history except like the GL amounts behind that particular vendor, you don't actually have individual invoicing data. Just for this year, you would need to make your changes
He said coming from another system, but no history.
Okay. In that case, just for this year, you'd need to make your changes here in your 1099 detail window. And you could, I mean, since you're coming on that, if you want to wait until the end of the year, because you can go ahead and set them up as 1099s now, collect, of course, the information for the rest of this year. And you could, if you wanted to, I mean, you can say up until as of August, you can say, I paid this vendor $10,000 in my old system. You can go ahead and put that in manually. And then everything you do, of course, going forward until the end of the year will, of course, populate the other months. Would really be the only way to do that without having any history to change.
Okay. Let's see. Next question. Are the dates based on voucher date or paid date?
It is the date paid, actually.
Okay. If we get a letter back from the IRS that says, if we get a letter back from the IRS that says the name doesn't match the tax ID number.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm confused with this question.
No.
Okay.
No, I know what you're talking about. Like you could have gotten the W-9 from the employee, and they maybe did not fill out their name correctly.
Okay, we'll go with that.
Or you can, of course, at any time when you let me discard these changes real quick. When you're printing your 1099s, you, unlike your W-2s, from this window, you're not actually accessing the vendor information themselves. So all you would have to do is just go to your vendor card prior to printing their 1099, make sure these check names are correct, save it, go back and print the 1099, and it'll update it.
Okay. All right. Next question. Beaumont Construction's legal name is JTV LLC. How do I get that to show my 1099, just for 1099 purposes?
Again, that's kind of like what we were just talking about.
Okay.
You change the name here in this check name field, and that's what populates the 1099.
Okay. Some of our vendors have negative 1099 amounts. What causes them, and how do you prevent it from happening?
It may have happened. Normally, of course, when you do like a void a check, it of course will back out the 1099 amount, but normally you wouldn't have a negative 1099 amount. I'm trying to think of how that might have occurred. I might need to actually take that one offline and do a little digging into your documents.
Okay.
Because you normally, unless, let's think about that for a moment here. I'm going to have to turn that one over a little bit, because you really shouldn't have a negative 1099. Now, did you over credit memo the vendor perhaps? Because that credit memos do allow you to do credit memos against $1099 also, so something like that possibly could have been done. That's why we might need to do a little digging into that vendor's document history for the year and get a better understanding of what's happened.
I'll give you the contact information.
That would be perfect.
Okay. Do you have to be given access to the update 1099 information in order to use that option? I see it listed under utilities, but does not pop up when I click it.
Yes. You'll need to be given security to that particular window.
Okay. If you have two separate GP companies with payable information, are you able to combine the payable information in one Greenshades process? Or does each GP company have to use the Greenshades wizard? The FEI number is the same in separate GP companies.
Oh. You would have to run the wizard for each individual company because it's reading it pulls the data out of that individual company database. But then you should be able to combine it because it creates kind of like an Excel file. So you should be able to either combine it together in Excel, or if you do pass it over to Greenshades, they can combine it for you since it's all under the same EIN.
Okay. Let's see. When you work with franchises and pay intermarket, this is not good. What? Sorry, I'm trying to read this out loud.
Okay.
Oh, I think it's more of a comment than a question. Sorry. What is the registration process to file electronically on our own?
I'm trying to you would have to actually, there's a 1099 publication printed by the IRS, and what you have to do is they call it a FIRE account. It's like FIRE, and within the IRS website, you can go and you can set yourself up. You can register for a FIRE account, and they'll give you the number, and that's the number that you use to file electronically with them. And if you're doing something that requires like a Social Security upload, the same thing. You go to the Social Security website, and you can set yourself up with an account, and they send you back an account number and a PIN that you use to upload the data with.
All right. Okay, so looks like 2 more questions and then we should be good.
All right.
Let's say you write the check to Beaumont Construction, but the legal name is TC Construction. You want the check to be Beaumont, but the 1099 to be TC. Is there any way to do that without having to change the check name prior then the printing and then also after the printing?
The only way you could, let me contemplate that for just a moment. Let me get up here. Let's delete that. Just delete that, please. Let me go to my vendor very quickly. Pull this over a little bit. Yeah, I was hoping there might be, but no, there's really no way to do that because you're able to change, the addresses and everything at the moment you're writing the check. But let me look in here just a moment. Give me just a moment. You can hold on. See if I've got any checks out here that need to be looked at. Uptown Trust, I'll save that. Edit checks. Continue. That's not what I wanted. All right, let's see if I can find one here. Oh, we were talking about, of course, I don't happen to have any for Beaumont at this particular moment in time. But if I go here, see even here in the edit check menu, you know how you can come in here and you can change certain things? Like you can change things on your check stubs, your applies, your distributions. It doesn't allow you to change that. So all of that would have to be done prior to printing the check for that particular vendor. Then you'd have to go back and reset it.
Okay. All right. Last question.
Okay.
How do you verify a vendor's TIN number so you don't get an exception report back from the IRS?
I think you can, that's a good question. I think you can actually go on the IRS's website and they'll let you verify those types of things there.
Alrighty. Well, that is all of our questions. So before we wrap up, I will just let everybody know that all upcoming events and promotions can be found on our website at socius1.com. Our next GP webinar is November 7th from 1 to 2 Eastern Time on streamlining your quote to cash process using Dynamics GP. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Philip, and we look forward to having you guys join us again. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for joining.